All right, it's 12 o'clock. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well, and welcome to this week's Iowa Learning Farms Conservation Webinar. I'm Matt Helmers with Iowa State University here in the Department of Ag and Biosystems Engineering and Director of the Iowa Nutrient Research Center. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Denise Schwab. Denise is a beef extension specialist with Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. I got to see Denise talk about this topic at a Crop Advantage Series meeting in Cedar Falls, Iowa. In fact, I think that was about the time of the polar vortex. I remember it being very cold. It was colder that day than today, even though today is a little chilly. And so Denise is going to talk to us today about pasture management following a drought. Even though we've gotten a little rain in some parts of Iowa, I think we're still in a drought and still a really relevant topic. And I think kind of builds on in a similar vein to what Patrick Wall, one of the other beef extension specialists, talked about a couple weeks ago with cover crops. So always looking at forage for our livestock out there. And anytime I can hear somebody talk about beef cattle and pasture, it's pretty good. So I'm looking forward to this. As always, if you have questions, please type those in the chat box and we'll get those to Denise at the end of her talk. With that, nobody came on here to listen to me. So Denise, the virtual floor is all yours.
All right. Thanks for the opportunity to share this. I did make some changes from when we were together in January, Matt. So hopefully you pick up a few things. I started off with the drought map. So I think we're at 196, 197 weeks of drought. This was the map that came out last week. So you're seeing a little bit of a decrease in the red area, which is good, although it still sits right over my house. But I think this is the first time in a long time we've seen any white on the map. So that's kind of encouraging. But even if we start to get more rains, which it appears from this week, maybe we will, it's going to take a while to respond to that. And I think we're still dealing with what we call drought conditions. So this is just from Livestock Market Information Service, and it shows the percentage of pasture and rangeland in the U.S. That was in the poor to very poor condition. And you can see the blue bar there. We ended up at the end of 2023, so October 1st of 2023, in as bad of condition as we've been for a long time. So even if we do get rains across the country, and we're starting to see that, it's still going to take a while to recover our pasture. So we've been looking at some options with that. Thanks to Madeline Wustenberg, she shared this slide with us, and I wanted to throw it in because it's given us the 3-month outlook. So looking at April, May, and June. And if we look at the state of Iowa, we are above normal for expected temperatures, so expecting to stay warm. And that can be an advantage early on to get some of those spring grasses up and going soon, which is a plus for us. But if we look over on the right-hand map where it's showing the moisture, we're kind of just in equal chances of being wet or being dry. So to me, that says kind of looking at normal rainfall. Maybe Southwest Iowa is looking a little more promising than the rest of us. But we're probably not going to make drastic changes to that moisture. I threw this in here just showing my age, I guess, but just to say that, Carter's liver pills, there's no magic fix in this whole drought situation and dealing with pasture. So don't think I'm going to give you one quick answer that's going to solve it. This is going to take a while to get there. I reduced my list. Normally I have about 7 or 8 things on my pasture to-do list when I do these presentations. I really cut it down to 4 because I think as we're looking at really this next spring to summer grazing season, we've got a lot less tools in our toolbox because of the situation we're coming out of. So I want to kind of talk about those. I also rearranged them a little bit. I moved to the top, looking at our carrying capacity and stocking density up on top of the list, because I think long-term, and especially in the next few months, that's something we all really need to spend some time on. So I'm going to go through each of these individually. So when we think about pasture management, it's really trying to balance out what do we have available for feed resources, and then what do we have in their cow herd inventory, and how do we get those to balance? I think I'll say in the last decade, but especially in the last few years where we've been really dry, our cow inventory's gotten really heavy at the time that our feed resources maybe have been lightened up because of drought. So we're kind of out of balance, and we need to look at that as an option. So I'm going to start a little differently than I normally do. Normally I start with the cow herd. I'm going to start with the pasture today, because I think we need to look at what's the capacity of our pastures starting out this spring, and then how do we handle that going forward. So taking a much shorter term approach versus a long-term approach. And so it's starting to get a guess on forage growth, and that's a real hard number to get our hands around. But this is a table from our pasture management guide that kind of gives us some estimates on how much dry matter forage is in an inch of forage growth at the time we turn out. So trying to get a handle of what's our yield out there. So if we take an example, and I'm just going to pick 200 pounds of dry matter per inch. If you look at the different kinds of pastures out there, the different grasses, and the fair, good, and excellent condition, I'm not sure I've seen more than maybe one or maybe two pastures that I would consider in excellent condition last year going into this spring. So I'm going to say I'm going to pick the middle of the road between fair and good pastures and kind of use an average of 200 pounds of dry matter per inch. So if we have 8 inches of grazeable growth out there, that gives us about 1,600 pounds of dry matter per acre. So that's kind of our starting point. Now, we don't want to take it all off. We want to make sure that we leave enough out there to regrow. So I'm kind of a user of the old philosophy of take half, leave half, meaning I want to leave half the grass out there. Grasses grow differently than legumes in that it takes the existing leaves to photosynthesize sunlight to produce sugars to start regrowth. So we want to leave at least 3 to 4 inches on most of our pastures. Now, bluegrass, we can go a little shorter than that, but our tall grasses, we'd like to leave at least 3 to 4 inches of residue out there to kickstart and initiate the regrowth process. So if we use that take half, leave half, and that kind of fits into this table looking at utilization. If I have my druthers, I would like to get everybody to a 5 to 6 pasture rotation or paddock rotation, because that means we're moving cows about twice a week. You're already checking cows that often. It's not overly burdensome, and it kind of fits in that take half, leave half category. So if we use that as a guideline, we would have about 800 pounds of dry matter per acre that we can utilize and get into the cow. So that's kind of the process to say, what do we have available from a forage standpoint? Now, if we switch to the cow side, there's lots of things that determine how much forage a cow needs. And age and size are really the biggest one, and stage of production in that. So thanks to Beth Reynolds, she put this slide together, but it's looking at comparing a mature cow that's about 1,400 pounds, spring calving, at the turnout. She's going to consume roughly 36 pounds of dry matter a day. A first calf heifer, she's going to be about 85%, so about 1,200 pounds. She doesn't have quite the capacity. She's only going to eat maybe 32 pounds of forage. And then our yearling heifers then that we're just getting ready to breed, they're probably only about 60% of mature weight, so they're only going to consume about 20 pounds of dry matter. And we can see the differences here in terms of how much of that protein, the brown part of the bar is how much of that energy or protein is needed for just maintenance of the animal. The red part is what's needed for lactation. And then the orange or yellow part is what's needed for growth. So our young females obviously are still growing, so they need more of it for growth there. But that kind of gives us a ballpark. So if we use that mature cow size of 1,400 pounds, she needs about 36 pounds of dry matter a day. Another way to look at it, if you didn't have Beth available to put together those slides for you, is kind of using that general rule of thumb of about 2.5% of dry matter consumption per pound of body weight. And so again, that gets us to that 35 or 36 pounds of dry matter intake for a 1,400 pound cow. There's lots of things that vary on that, but that's a good ballpark to use. I think we as an industry are probably guilty of looking only at our cow herd and not considering that calf at side. So, by about the time we hit that June grazing period, that calf's going to be close to 300 pounds, hopefully, and it's going to be starting to consume forages. So if we add his consumption into it, we're getting up to about 42 and a half pounds of dry matter intake per day per pair. So if we look at 800 pounds of dry matter available, we need 42 and a half pounds of dry matter per pair per day. That tells us we can graze about 18 pairs for one day or 6 pairs for 3 days on that forage that was 8 inches tall and we took down to 4 inches. So I think it's time we start to really look at how are we allocating our cows and realize that our parents and grandparents, when they were grazing cows, they didn't have 1,400 pound cows. They had 1,000 or 1,100 or 1,200 pound cows. They didn't eat as much. They didn't need as much. And if we're trying to run the same number of animals on the same acres as our ancestors did, we're overgrazing. So just taking a little bit of time to do some cowboy math and see where we're at on that. The other thing that I think is really important as we start to look at that stocking rate and stocking density is, I believe at this point, we need to be ruthless with our cows. So I love animals just as much as everybody else. But if she has bad teeth, legs, udders, eyes, or bad attitude, she needs to be gone, especially right now. So the graph you see here is the weekly slaughter cow prices from South Dakota, and looking at the prices, even at the lowest part. So we see this cyclic effect. Our kill cow prices are always lowest in the winter when everybody's preg checking and selling cows, and tend to be higher in the spring and summer when we don't have as many cows going to market. Long term, our average has been down in that $60 to $70 a hundredweight. But you can see right now, even in the bottom of the market, the dark blue line there from this year, even in the bottom, we were over $1 a pound for cull cows. So that is tremendous cull cow pricing. If we have any problems, I think now is the time to get rid of them. Even I kind of jokingly say, even if she looks at you cross-eyed, try check her in July or August. And if she is not pregnant, she needs to be gone. That's going to affect our income flow, yes, as we move forward, because we'll have fewer cows in the next couple of years to market when calf prices are high. But with the tight feed supply and tight pasture supplies, we need to be a little ruthless on these cows. So just say, check those cows early, and anybody who's not producing, you need to say bye-bye to. One of the other things that I think is always important when we look at challenging pasture situations is to delay turnout. So as I was talking, we want 8 inches of growth. Here we say 3 to 4. I would say maybe 4 to 6 is a minimum at point we start to turn out for grazing. And that's just so that we let that grass get enough nutrient reserves down into its root system to give it kind of a kickstart. So we're almost kind of babying it along, handling it with kid gloves, but really letting that pasture get a good start before we turn out on it. And then this idea of maybe it's a time to cut stocking rates, and we can do that by getting rid of some of our problem animals too. So shifting a little bit, looking at the pasture, it's always important to do a good soil testing. Producers are really good at soil testing from a cropping standpoint. Just adopt some of those same principles to our pasture management. So think about our soil testing, doing it on a regular basis at the same time every year. Pay attention to soil types within those pastures, and then fertilize up to the optimum level. So the good thing about a good rotational pasture management system is that we're not removing much P and K. So most of what the cow eats, she returns back in terms of urine and manure. The problem becomes, or two problems. One is when we don't have good grazing distribution And so we tend to move those nutrients from the grass where they're grown to under the trees or along the streams or wherever the cows congregate. And so the better our grazing management, the less nutrient movement we have that way. The other thing that can be a culprit is hay removal. So one of the practices that is very beneficial to a lot of producers is to take a portion of our early growth off as hay and use that either as winter feed or later summer feed. When we remove hay, we remove a lot of P and K. So think about that and how we return that to P and K. The other thing is our agronomy team has just put out a great blog post on looking at P and K levels and soil testing and really taking it up to that optimum level, just like we do with our corn and bean management, and getting our pH right is going to go a long ways. Nitrogen, we know, we really don't do a lot of testing for it because it tends to move more than our P and K does. But because pastures are grass, they respond very well to nitrogen. We know that. And that first, I have here 30 to 50, 40 to 60, that first dose of nitrogen we put out there is going to be have the most efficient response to it. Typically, I would encourage that we not put a lot of nitrogen out early, like right now, because we've got more spring growth than our cows can consume. So why do we want more growth when we're not utilizing what we have out there? Let's hold it off until, say, May sometime for our first dose to kind of get us an extra boost of growth going into June and July, and then follow it with a split application in the fall or late summer as well. This is one of those years that I would say maybe I would modify that suggestion and say, go ahead and put some nitrogen out now. It's going to really help the grass that we do have out there get a good start and get going. And just looking forward, I'm concerned we don't have enough moisture to really get that typical early spring flush of growth. So maybe some nitrogen would be beneficial right now. I do have that last comment on there. We've got to have moisture for nitrogen to give us a response. In other words, for the plant to be able to utilize the nitrogen that's out there, we have to have enough moisture that it's growing actively. So that is a bit of a concern depending on where you're at right now. There's a few times when we say do not put nitrogen out. And one is if you've newly seeded or interseeded some pastures. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But those ones we do not want to fertilize with nitrogen because what we're trying to do is set back the existing stand. And the other is if we have a high concentration of, I goofed that. If we have a high concentration of fescue, we don't want to add more nitrogen because fescue loves nitrogen. It's very aggressive anyway. It's already trying to crowd out the other grasses, so we don't want to give it any additional advantage. All right, so what about legumes? First of all, legumes can be used to help provide some nitrogen. It fixes nitrogen from the air into the soil, but not all plants are the same. So white clover is very low in terms of nitrogen fixation. Alfalfa tends to be our highest. For the most part, those legumes are going to use that fixed nitrogen for themselves and their own growth first. And then what's left over is available for our grass stands. So typically we need to see at least a third of the stand needs to be a good legume in order to get that 50 pounds of nitrogen that grasses need. So alfalfa is great at fixing nitrogen. Red clover is kind of right behind it. Then trefoil, and then our white clovers are the worst. So if we want to get legumes into our stand, if we don't already have it, again, making sure we pay attention to that soil pH, because legumes are a lot more particular about the conditions they grow in if we're going to do that. And then also we need to think a little bit about rotational grazing and the distribution of that P and K, as I said earlier. Third step then is control weeds. And the one things I would say is if you saw a little bit of an encroachment or increase in weeds last year, expect more this year. Weeds are very opportunistic. And anytime there's an open patch of soil that they can pop a seed down in there, they're going to be able to germinate probably better and faster than our forages that we want. So pay attention to weeds that are out there and expect increased weed pressure, and have a plan in place now to deal with that early. So think about what we're doing. We have a lot of producers that'll want to get some other seedings out there, get some legumes out there. And that's great, but we got to get the weeds under control before we put legumes out there. So thinking ahead of time, working with our agronomist in terms of herbicide plans to use is really important. Also thinking about timing. So as we think about summer annuals, one of the things I'm battling in my pasture is foxtail, which I've seen really encroach into a lot of pastures this last year. Getting something down as a pre-emergent herbicide is going to be important early in the season now, here in the next few months, to try to stop the germination of those summer annuals. Winter annuals, the time to do that is more in the fall as they're before they germinate, or we can treat the plants that are out there now. Our perennials, to me, the big perennials I always think about is Canadian thistle and multiflora rose. And we could get a pretty decent kill on those in the fall, but we can also spray those and get a good herbicide kill in the summer here. Typically, just as they're starting to bloom or put blossoms out, that's a good time. They're very vulnerable then, and so we get a good kill then. And then our other major weed population is going to be tall thistle, musk thistle, bull thistle. Those are our biennials. They germinate in the late summer and they overwinter as a rosette. So we really get the best harvest or best kill of those if we can spray late in the summer, late in the fall, as that rosette stage is really taking nutrients down into the root system. And then if we're going to try to spray in the spring, we need to be doing it before that plant starts to bolt or send up a seed stem. So when it's still very flat in the rosette stage, that's another good time. So again, work with your agronomist to do that. They've got a number of really good publications related to weeds and herbicide use and management. So check some of those out if you need more help. The last one I put up here then is interseeding. And I did this last because to me, it's interseed only if we know we're going to get rain. So we want to set the pastures up ahead of time if we anticipate we're getting enough rain to interseed, because putting seed out there is not a magic answer. We've got to have rainfall to make it germinate. So if we do decide we're going to try to interseed something and try to get a boost to our pasture renovation, couple things. Again, soil test, graze those pastures really short. This is a one time where I'd say overgraze and abuse your pasture, because what we want to do is set the existing stand back. We want to damage it. We want to hurt it a little bit in order to let that new seeding come in and really get going. The other thing that you'll hear me say multiple times is we have to factor in the loss of that grazing time, because if we interseed something, we are not going to graze that in the spring or early summer. We probably won't start grazing it until fall. And so make sure you plan that in. I did put something in here, and I'll see another place too, is minimum tillage if we're going to do it. So try to find the no-till drill that can go direct into that stand and not have to stir up that soil and lose whatever moisture we still have there. Then regardless of the interseeding method afterwards, again, no nitrogen fertilizer. We want to let that old stand have a slow start so we get our new stand going. We don't want to turn out onto it until it's get a good root system on it, and then maybe have some light grazing as we're moving forward. So how do we seed? I left frost seeding in here. I debated taking it out. We didn't have, normally frost seeding works really well, especially for red clover, but we didn't have a really good freeze thaw process going on this spring, and we're kind of past that window, but that is an option in most years. So we're really looking at the next 3, and I'll say the next 2. So overseeding and no-till pasture renovation, basically that's the same process, except the overseeding is a broadcast seeding and the no-till typically is a drill seeding. So we want to set back the existing sod. Depending on what's out there, maybe we want to kill the existing sod, and then get some seed out, get some moisture, get it to germinate, stay off it until summertime, and get a new stand started. The last one on complete pasture renovation, where we're actually going to go in and prepare the seed bed, typically is a good option. I'm not real sure what this year, depends on where you're at least where I'm at my place. I don't think we have enough moisture to get a good stand if we're going to go in and till up the seed bed, stir it, and lose some moisture that way. So I'm keen on the no-till or overseeding. And again, factor in that grazing loss. This is our PM 1792. It's a simple 2-page, 1-page front and back list of the different forage species that are available and where they're best suited. So are they better for hay? Are they better for silage? Are they better for grazing? Palatability. The flip side of this then looks at growing conditions. So which of our forages will tolerate wet feet, wet conditions, which tolerate dry conditions, which ones, and then the seeding rate as well. So there's no miracle forage. We keep wanting something new to come out that will be the salvation of everybody, and that just isn't there. So use the species we know we can grow well in Iowa. I wasn't quite sure where to put this in, but I need to put it in. For a good portion of the state, even if we start to get moisture from a pasture growth standpoint, our water systems are very low, whether it's streams, creeks, rivers, or ponds. And so consideration of water sources is something that I wanted to at least throw in here and say, make sure you're double checking. What are your options there? What are some alternatives to water sources until we get enough subsoil moisture to renovate our water systems? Then from some additional grazing is, so this is the kind of the think longer, is what do we have available for crop residue? Obviously that's not till fall, but how do we get better utilization of our corn stalks? Thinking about maybe if we stay dry, are there some fields that can be harvested early so that we can get an extra 2 to 3 weeks of grazing off of those fields? Is CRP going to open up again from a disaster standpoint? Even if it doesn't, are there some CRP fields available for grazing or haying, even if you have to pay some the discount for being able to harvest those? Think about annual forages. So can we put some summer annuals into small fields in place of corn? Some advantages in that it breaks up the pest cycle, but they also grow a large quantity of forage on very little water requirements. And then how do we incorporate our hay fields maybe into grazing late in the season too? That's a little contingent on how much actual hay do we get off them to get started. Just a little bit more on annuals in here, and thinking about how we can maybe put in just a 10-acre. I a lot of times tell producers, I'm sure you have a triangle field somewhere that is a pain in the neck to have to plant and harvest, because you no more than get in it, unfold the planter, make a lap or two around, fold it up, pull back out. Those are the kind of fields that I'd say, can we look at putting a summer annual in there? A sorghum sudan grass, one of the millets, get anywhere from 3 to 7 tons of dry matter an acre. We can either graze it or we can harvest it, but help to stretch that forage supply a little bit farther. And here are just some examples of it. We can either harvest that off as silage, we can graze that off, or we can let it stockpile and use that as a winter grazing option as well. So again, thinking about fields that are available that we can work that into. Annual forages aren't always 100%. They got to have moisture to germinate. We do run some risk with either nitrate or prussic acid, but those are both manageable issues to deal with, but something to look at summer annuals. So just to kind of review, think about calculating our carrying capacity, looking at how much forage we have available, and then adjusting our stocking rate and stock density to meet that. Look at soil testing and managing our nutrients to help give that grass the best care it can get. Controlling weeds that are robbers of both moisture and nutrients, and then interseed only if rain is in the forecast, or if this rain continues, maybe we're good, but I'm a little leery for what we're getting at home. Just a couple resources. One is our pasture management guide that's available at the ISU store. It's a $5 publication, but includes all of our pasture management data and research in it. We also at the Iowa Beef Center have under the production tab, right up here, production, there's a forage section. And under that forage section, we have lots of resources in terms of establishing and renovating and managing pastures and hay ground. I just threw in 2 quick slides to say, if we get to the point where we don't have enough feed, there's lots of options to supplement or stretch what we've got, but we've got to have a good inventory of what we've got available. It's not a one-to-one substitution when we're trying to add feed to what's already on the pastures, but looking at some alternatives and doing some research in terms of pricing. When we get to that point, we're going to look at price per unit or per pound of limiting nutrients, whether that's corn or energy, and what's available to you at your specific location. So your beef team members can help with that. And then kind of my last message is be patient, because we didn't get into pasture problems in a single year. We're looking at our 4th year now of drought. So it's going to take time to improve it and get it back to the way we want it to look. And with that, here's our beef team and our contact information. And I'd say thank you and open it up to questions. And I'll pop up Matt's slides for him to share as you're typing questions into the box.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Denise. All right. If you need a CCA CEU, you're on for that reason or would like one, please email Elena Whitaker, ALENAW at iastate.edu by 5 o'clock today. Include your name, the name you entered to watch the webinar, and your CCA number. Again, ALENAW at iastate.edu. I'll type that in the chat box, but email your name, the name you entered to watch the webinar, and your CCA number. We can go to the next slide. If you are on and are willing to fill out a voluntary demographic survey, we would certainly appreciate it. We only need 1 survey response for all 2024 webinars. So if you've watched a 2024 webinar live and filled this out, thank you very much. If you're on for the first time and are willing to do this, we'd greatly appreciate it. You can scan that QR code or go to iowalearningfarms.org/survey. And again, only 1 response is needed for all 2024 webinars. And then we'll plug the next week's webinar, which is Dr. Maren McCrae we're going to have a presentation from Canada. She's at the University of Waterloo, and she's going to talk about targeting conservation practices to reduce phosphorus loss risk in the Lake Erie watershed. All right. We do have a couple questions. I'm going to take my prerogative as the moderator to ask the first one, Denise, which is,
okay.
I noticed on your one slide, the one legume was Cura clover. Have you had any experience of people putting that in for a forage? We tried to do it to crop corn in it, and it seemed like it took so long to really get going. I was just wondering kind of how it comes on in a forage situation.
Yeah, we've not used it a lot for that simple reason, because I think they say the first year it sleeps, the second year it creeps, the third year it leaps, right? So it really takes 3 years to get it established.
Okay.
If you've got it in a pasture sitting and you try to interseed, the thing is you need to be so careful on the grazing management to allow it time to really get going that I just haven't seen it really take off now. I know there are folks that are using it. There's a few, I think Wisconsin's had better luck with it maybe than we have, but we've just not seen it on the beef world. I hear more of it in the dairy world.
Okay, thanks. You kind of brought up this kind of concern about water shortage. Have you heard about folks getting prepared for supplemental watering or being concerned about that?
Yeah. So where I live, we're actually on Poweshiek water. And I know that is one that did send a letter out, probably 3 weeks ago now, to its customers that actually told us because of the drought situation and the well situation, they're encouraging us to try to limit our water use. So first priority is, of course, human use. Second priority is livestock use. And then try not to limit the use for crop production. So that is going to be a bit of an issue. But I think so. We're going to have folks that have been on rural water for their livestock, looking at how do we adjust that over and go back to our wells if we still have them.
Okay.
What's involved in those? In most cases, they probably have not been used very heavily. So some things like water testing, what's the quality of what we've got in that well existing? What's our flow rate? I think that's going to be a big issue as we go into summer is does it have the flow rate to be able to keep up with livestock needs in the heat of summer? Are a couple of things to think about. Right where I'm at, we don't have a lot of pond watering. We do have a lot of creek watering. I think the creeks have been moving, although slowly, kind of depends on if they're spring fed or not. But in other parts of the state, I do know that ponds are quite low, creek flow is quite low. And so water sources for pastures will be an issue as we move forward, especially if they happen to be in a location where rural water now is off the table, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I just encourage folks, if that's an area kind of thinking about planning for livestock water. Dan Anderson did a emergency webinar. I was going to say an emergency pod, but emergency webinar last summer talking about that, even thinking about what you might be able to do for some on-farm storage to store water so you're reducing peak demand in the middle of the day and so forth. So might be something to take a look at if somebody is concerned about that topic. There was somebody from Marshall County that they were, talking with excavators digging 8 or more feet deep and not finding moisture in the upland. Kind of indicate what can we expect for forage production this summer if we don't get recharge, if we don't recharge the subsoil.
If we don't, that's a really good question, and I don't know that I really have the best answer. I would say, for my little knowledge of geology, and I'll refer to Matt for some of that, but a lot of our grasses, our pasture grasses, have a shallow root system. So from a grass standpoint, these little showers that we're getting now, I think are really going to help the grasses because you got to fill that topsoil before you get to subsoil moisture. So I think that's going to boost our grasses over some of our deeper rooted legumes. If we think in the past, our alfalfa really carried a lot of our pasture growth last year because of that deep taproot, and it was going down below into that subsoil moisture. So I don't know, but my guess would be that maybe our deep rooted taproot plants like alfalfa and clovers might be hindered more than our shallow grass just in the short term. Mm-hmm. Long term, I don't know. Matt, maybe you have some more to add on that one.
No, I think that's an interesting way to think about it, Denise, because you're exactly right that, these little bit of rains that we're getting now are at least, probably providing us some moisture in the top couple feet. They probably aren't doing a lot, I don't think, to recharge us yet, but hopefully they can get some of those things growing. But then I think we'd all be concerned if we do run out of water in the summer, what do we have available there? And, if we knew what the weather was going to be like, it would make it easier. But I do think these, hopefully we're closer to that above average precip than the white band that Madeline sent us. Okay, we got a couple other questions. Do you have a fertilizer product you would recommend when applying N on pastures?
No, that's getting outside of my comfort zone.
Okay. All right.
Most of it's going to be urea, and the thing is to make sure we're applying nitrogen ahead of when we anticipate some moisture so that we don't have a lot of it volatilize off.
Yeah. So you could probably use Agritane treated urea as well, but that might raise the cost some. But yeah, like you said, getting it on before rain. Okay, somebody wrote in here, while bird's foot trefoil oil is commonly used successfully in pastures, what's been your experience with crown vetch, not hairy vetch?
I have not heard of much crown vetch out there.
Okay.
So again, if you've used it and had good experience, great. I've just not seen much of it out
Okay.
there.
Okay. All
Trefoil
right.
is another one of those that it's probably there. We just don't necessarily see it until it has enough growth to become visible, right?
Okay.
So
Yep.
it looks a lot like alfalfa early on. And so you might think they're little shoots of alfalfa and it might be trefoil, but it kind of creeps and it's out there. But in a lot of cases, we don't let it have enough rest to become visible.
Yeah. I did like your that aspect of if you have an area that's tough to, to farm around, and you have livestock, is that an area that you can put some summer annuals on to kind of stockpile or think about, additional forage source into the future.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of gets me thinking. We've talked a lot about some of the field edge, redefining the field edge, and there are
Yep.
opportunities for some forages, summer annuals on those areas rather than trying to crop them and
Right.
hassle with them. So, all right, in my talking there, we got one more question that came in. Should we be concerned about drought stress causing toxicity problems in our forages during the year?
The one toxicity I would be concerned with is nitrate toxicity, and especially in our faster growing forages. So I'll say our summer annuals in particular, can be some others too, but that's the one that comes to mind. Where we typically see the biggest risk with nitrate toxicity is when we're really dry and then close to harvest, we get a shower. And so it's like it gets this big old gulp of water and sucks up a lot of nitrogen at the same time and doesn't have time to translocate that nitrogen throughout the plant, either into, in the case of corn or sorghum, into a seed or throughout the rest of the plant. And then we'll get a concentration of nitrogen in the lower part of the plant.
Okay, I'm going to ask a very basic question that you're probably like, Matt, that's not. Should we be testing that forage to, if we get one of those dry conditions and then a rain, should we be testing that before we use that as a forage source for our cattle?
I think a lot of it depends on how we're using it. So if we're going, if let's just say it's sorghum Sudan and we're going to graze it, we don't want to graze sorghum Sudan shorter than about 8 to 10 inches at the most.
Okay.
So if we're grazing it, I would say graze it light, take off the top half, leave a good foot or more of residue. And then I wouldn't get real excited about testing because
Okay.
most of it will concentrate in the lower part of the plant. Kind of
Okay.
the same, but if we're going to go in and we're going to harvest it for silage or take the whole plant down like we would corn silage, then I think it's important that we get it tested because all of that plant is going into our feed base. Now, some will
Okay.
dissipate. And if we're talking corn silage, we do have the ability to use a little solution, nitrate solution, just to kind of indicate where there's nitrogen within that plant right before harvest. I wouldn't do it real far ahead of time because
Okay.
it's going to move. The other thing
Mhm.
is, corn or sorghum, either one, especially corn, if there's an ear for it to move the nitrogen to make crude protein, is what the nitrogen is used for. Then typically if we give it a little time, it's going to translocate that nitrate up into the ear
Okay.
as protein. It's just when it's right before harvest that we have the biggest risk.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. And thanks, Denise, for all the information. And okay. We got another one. So, okay. Do you think it's more economical to graze summer annuals like sorghum, Sudan, or green chop for immediate feed?
Well, that's a good question. So Wade, I give you a point. I saw that was
Okay.
Wade.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I think it looks at what are the rest of the conditions. So I don't think it's something you can just automatically say there's one right answer. So if that sorghum Sudan field is close to your pasture, close to your building sites, got a good water source, have the ability to strip graze it, I think grazing is going to be more economical because you don't have to start a tractor and a chopper and haul it to a pile and then store it and put it in a bunker and all, then feed it back out, right? So I think that's our best option. However, when we're grazing, we're probably going to only utilize about half of what's out there because we got to leave some to regrow, right? And we don't want to graze those plants real short because with sorghum Sudan grass, we can also get into prussic acid issues on the regrowth part of it. So from that standpoint, I think grazing is our best option if it's an option. If that field is not where there's a water source, not where there's cows already in a pasture or dry lack situation, then green chopping is a feasible option to harvest it off, deliver it to the cows on a daily basis. Do not harvest multiple days worth at a time, because that causes more issues from a nitrate standpoint if we're at nitrate risk. And then if you are going to mechanically harvest it, leave at least 8 to 10 inches to get regrowth. If you want regrowth, if you want to just chop it off and you're done, that's one thing. But if you want it to grow for another harvest or grazing, you need to pay attention to that growth. You've got to have at least 1 or 2 nodes still on that stem before when you're harvesting it.
Okay. All right. There. Now I have no more questions in there that I see. So Denise, thank you so much. This is really important. And as I said, if we can talk about cattle grazing, I'm darn happy. And thanks for bringing that one up. So next week, we're going to go north of the border. Dr. Maren McCrae is going to talk about targeting conservation practices to reduce pea loss risk in the Lake Erie watershed. With that, I will give Denise the last word if she has any parting comments.
Just thanks for the opportunity. And if you have pasture questions, don't hesitate to contact either your beef field specialist or your local agronomist who will help you out with it.
Okay. Okay. Thanks so much, Denise.
Thanks, Matt.
Yep.